All right, everybody. Welcome to the Sunday morning Science of Mind class hosted by Dr. Petra Weldes. If you're watching us live on Facebook and you want to join us in the Zoom interactive room, please hit the link in the description above. And as always, I want to encourage you to go to CSLDallas.org to find all of our upcoming online events, workshops, classes, and spiritual content. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Petra Weldes.
Well, good morning, and good morning, Ryan, and good morning to those of you who are sharing with us this morning on the Science of Mind class. We're still broadcasting from home, and we're still learning about what's going on with our space after the winter storm, but we will carry on, just as I know you are doing too. So we're on the bottom of page 273. We're going to be talking about what's on 274, but I do want to start with this little paragraph here at the bottom of page 273. St. Paul said we have the mind of Christ, which means that each one of us has immediate access to the intelligence of the universe. That's what it means to have Christ consciousness, to have the mind of Christ, is to know who we are, an outlet for the intelligence of the universe. And he goes on to say, we give intelligence with a capital I, the intelligence, which is the universe, outlet in two ways. One, by pure inspiration or intuition, when we are allowing that one infinite power and presence to move in us, through us, and as us in the world, or the more common way of bitter experience. And with most of us, it is through the latter. And of course, that's what happens, is that we have experiences. We have them personally, individually, as we're growing up, in our families. Our family has experiences. Humanity has experiences. And through all of this, what we do is we begin to create a set of beliefs about life. And as our physicality has evolved from survival mode, which we spent a millennium in, through the advent of self-awareness and the growth of civilization, and the opportunity to begin to discover and use the laws, the natural laws, as we also begin to discover and use the spiritual laws, and begin to have a sense or an experience of this larger reality, right? As our brains have developed through the reptilian limbic brain, the cerebral cortex, our ability to recognize what's going on, and our ability to choose. All of that evolution has been in service to our awareness that we no longer have to learn, or we no longer have to be an outlet for this intelligence through bitter experience, but can actually be an outlet through intuition and inspiration. And so what does that mean? That means that we can open our consciousness to a deeper understanding of reality besides just the facts of the matter. The fact that it's dangerous, the fact that you have to work hard, the fact that maybe you're not as good at things as you would like to be, right? These are the facts over the course of millennium. And then of course, over the course of our own life that we've either experienced and made a decision about, or quite frankly, we've been told, you're not good enough, you can't really do it, that's too hard, why would you want to do it anyway? Right? And all of that becomes the bitter experience through which we see life, perceive life. These become the thoughts, attitudes, and beliefs that are operative as the programming in our consciousness. And of course, it's that programming which the law of cause and effect, that becomes the cause. And then we get over and over and over again experiences that outpicture what we believe to be true about life, what we believe to be true about life. And so this is where our spiritual practice comes in, right? This is where our spiritual mind treatment comes in, and all the other tools and techniques that we use to uncover the truth of who we are and to allow the sense of who we are to shine forth, that we are the expressions of this intelligence. We're the place where love is showing up, and we get to co-create life. So we use our spiritual tools and practices for this process. In the Science of Mind, we teach spiritual mind treatment, which is a deliberate way of moving ourselves out of the bitter experience, the beliefs and attitudes and thoughts that have been laid down out of bitter experience, to beliefs and attitudes that are in alignment with our spiritual truth and the mystical understanding that we have about life, about ultimate reality, about what's really going on and who we really are. So there's some fabulous, a couple of paragraphs here on page 274 that I highly recommend that you flag. So if you ever forget or you want to be reminded about what we're doing in spiritual mind treatment, these are two really powerful paragraphs. The first paragraph is about what treatment is not. Treatment is not for the purpose of making things happen. Rather, it's to provide an avenue within ourselves through which they may happen. So treatment is not for the purpose of concentrating, focusing, forcing, making something happen. We don't use spiritual mind treatment so that we can concentrate on something, thinking that if we just concentrate on it long enough, then somehow magically we're going to make it happen. It's not that at all. Spiritual mind treatment is not something one does to another, not something one does to an environment or a situation. It is always the thing one does to oneself. What does that mean? That means spiritual mind treatment is for the purpose of reprogramming that which is running in the background, which is in fact the mold and the direction that the law is using to create our lives, to reprogram that not from bitter experience, but from our deepest spiritual inspiration, intuition, from the deep spiritual inspiration we get from the mystics, from the wisdom, the ancient wisdom of the world, and from our own deep experience of intuition as we align ourselves with who we truly are. So the end of that last paragraph is, we already live in a perfect universe, but it needs to be mentally seen and spiritually experienced before it can become a part of our everyday life. And so interestingly enough, he doesn't use the word emotional or feeling. He says mentally seen. We have to be able to conceive of the idea that we are more than the bitter experience that we've had, that the purpose of life is more than just the bitter experience that we've experienced ourselves or we've seen humanity experience, that we are more than that. We have to be able to conceive of that and then to spiritually experience it. What does that mean? To spiritually experience it means to withdraw from the human drama of life, all those things that create bitter experience, and to experience, embody the idea, move it out of just being an idea, but to seriously experience our oneness, to experience ourselves as an outlet of the divine, that we're not human beings who are trying to somehow reach God or reach out to this spiritual reality. It's already present. It's already everywhere present. It's already present in the entire universe and right where we are. What we're doing is awakening to this truth. That's what we do in our meditation experience when we're contemplating things like oneness and the reality of the infinite. And what does it mean to be an individualized expression of a universal presence, not something separate, but something inextricably one as the divine showing up as individuals. I mean, these are concepts that we can barely look at with our intellect and with our feeling nature. We're like, I don't really get that because it's so outside of our human experience. Except for those moments of deep intuition, walking in nature, hanging out with a granddaughter, being in those places and moments of absolute alignment. In those moments, we are spiritually experiencing the truth of our being, right? So we have a mental concept and we want to spiritually experience these things so that this reality actually becomes a part of our everyday life. Spiritual mind treatment is for the purpose of creating that mental concept and that spiritual experience. So how do we do this? How do we do this in our spiritual mind treatment? Okay, this right here, this next paragraph could be one of the most profound things to think about, whether we're doing spiritual mind treatment or whether we're doing any spiritual practice that is aligning ourselves with truth, that is moving out into the world in some new expression or co-creation. So he's using the example here of right action. If we treat for right action, we don't create right action. So here it is. Let me read this section to you. Something must come into the treatment, the spiritual mind treatment, which is uncompromising and absolute. Troward, comes straight out of Thomas Troward in the Edinburgh Lectures, and so you need to take classes with us on Thomas Troward. Go read the Edinburgh Lectures. This is brilliant, brilliant understanding. Thomas Troward says that we enter the absolute in such degree as we withdraw from the relative, and that we withdraw from the relative in such degree as we enter into the absolute. What he meant was this: in such degree as the answer and the result of our treatment is contingent upon any existent circumstances, any existing known fact, no matter how apparent, the treatment is not in the absolute. It is in the relative and necessarily conditioned by the contingent which is held in the mind. Okay, this is such a mouthful and it's so unbelievably profoundly important. Okay, I also want to remind us that this is in our spiritual work, in our spiritual mind treatment. This does not have to do with how we are lovingly compassionate to other people in their experiences. Nothing to do with that. This is the work we're doing in our own consciousness around our spiritual work to create a more loving, desirous outcome. We enter the absolute in which we withdraw from the relative, and we withdraw from the relative in such degree as we enter into the absolute. Okay, so what does absolute and relative, what are we talking about here? So the idea of, well, let's start with the relative. The idea of the space-time continuum, an understanding of the space-time continuum is that everything is in fact in relationship to everything else. That's what it means to be relative, space and time. So space is to be relative. Everything is relative to where it occupies, right? I'm here, you're there. It's up and it's down. And it's hot and it's cold, right? So in the relative experience of the space-time continuum, we have the pairs of opposites. It's either light or it's dark. And dark isn't a thing of itself, it's just the absence of light, right? You don't flip a switch and turn on dark. What you do is you turn off the light. So these pairs of opposites is either the full presence or the absence of something. And time, it's either past or future, right? And time is about duration. It's either now or it's the next now. Everything related to everything else. That's what relative means. And so when we are in the relative, we are in the world of bitter experience. My experience of my financial good is relative to my paycheck. It's relative to my skin color. It's relative to my socioeconomic situation in life. It's relative to my upbringing and whether or not I experienced financial hardship as a child, right? Do you see? My health, my relationships, my trust in the world, my ability to believe that I can actually get ahead. All of these things, when I'm in the relative, they're all related to something, to a condition or a circumstance, that bitter experience that we talked about earlier, right? And so these are the things then that we believe that our life is contingent upon. I'll make more money if I get a better paycheck. I'll be more financially free if the economy could just stop suppressing people of color. I'll be more financially well off when I release the trauma of my childhood and the bankruptcy that my family went through. And again, we can draw this out, whether it's health or relationships or the fact that I want to build a business or become an artist or simply have a better life experience. Do you see? The minute that, and we call that in metaphysics worldly wisdom, right? It's the wisdom of the world. And everything is contingent upon something. I can buy the house when the loan closes, or when I get a loan, or when I can be happy when somebody else changes. I can be free when the circumstances of the economic situation change. Do you see? These are conditions that are all related. Everything is related to each other. And if that's the case, we're kind of stuck, aren't we? Because we're no longer able to fully manifest our lives without these outer conditions changing in some form or fashion that we believe they should or need to. And we're kind of at the mercy of that, aren't we? In our spiritual mind treatment, we withdraw from all of that. We withdraw from all of that and we move into the absolute. And what does the absolute mean? It is the full presence of the reality of the infinite life. It's the full presence of joy. No opposite. It's the full presence of abundance. It's the full truth and understanding and inspired, intuitive experience that the universe is in fact abundant. It is in fact joy. And that all of creation, the whole point of creation is to express the absolute nature of life. So it's absolute because it's not conditioned on anything. It's not contingent on anything changing, because it is the pure expression, the pure potentiality to express itself in its fullness. So we withdraw from the contingents, the conditions in our spiritual mind treatment, and we move completely into the absolute reality. And we do this within our own consciousness, right? We're not for the purpose of making things happen, changing all those conditions, although they will change over time, changing all those conditions. It is to provide within ourselves an avenue through which they may happen, through ourselves, by rewriting the program and that is the program that the law uses to create life, to create our experience of life. And this is true whether we're working about ourselves individually or whether we're working with the ideas of humanity as a whole. We already live in a perfect universe, but it must be mentally seen and spiritually experienced. So we have to mentally see and spiritually experience this absolute truth as already present. Then remember, there's two outlets for intelligence, either our pure inspiration and intuition or bitter experience. The absolute is that pure intuition, that pure inspiration, when we align ourselves with joy and with love. And for me personally, I have to show myself that in nature to really get a hold of it in a big way. So it's not just an abstract concept, right? Because an abstract concept, oh, I'm abundant, I'm healthy, I'm joy, is really not going to cut it. We have to be able to sense and feel that absolute quality expressed so that we can say, yes, yes, that is the truth. That's the truth with a capital T, absolute, uncontingent on any condition, on any specific condition. That's the absolute truth. And so in our spiritual mind treatment, we are withdrawing from the relative experiences, these bitter experiences, and we are moving ourselves into alignment with the absolute. Now, remember, I want to say, this is not how we talk to our deepest love people who are, or our friends who are struggling with their own bitter experience. Well, just get over it. Isn't really going to help. If we have a spiritual relationship, we can invite them into remembering the absolute truth, right? But we don't speak to people just out of hand about the absolute truth, right? This is not about how we are compassionate for others. This is the work we're doing exclusively within our own consciousness when we are doing our spiritual work to create successful living, a successful, happy, joy-filled life for ourselves, and then participating in creating that for the people around us, for humanity as a whole. All right, so this is some really deep stuff. So the last thing I want to read here is on the top of page 275, in the middle of the first full paragraph, where you always have to look at anything he's put, anything that's in capital letters or in italics. It's really important. My treatment then must not consider the facts. The facts are relative. The treatment must become absolute. We must live in the causal reality of absolute truth, as opposed to considering the facts of the matter. The facts are all relative and in the conditioned, contingent world. Ooh, man. Taken me many years to really, 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 really work to make that shift. This is not necessarily something that happens overnight, but it is something that happens over many months and years of diligent spiritual practice, especially with spiritual mind treatment. All right, so we're going to stop there because, ooh, man, this is a mouthful. This is some of the most important, deepest understanding of our part of the work. So we're going to stop here. Ryan, I'm going to turn to you and see what comments or questions we have, what sharing. Let's see what's going on.
You know, it's interesting because when you say you're going to turn to me now, it's totally changed in our paradigm.
This is true.
Yes. So once again, thank you everybody for joining us here on our Zoom as well as our Facebook Live. We love to see you guys. And if you'd like to participate and you're watching us on Facebook Live, you can always find the Zoom meeting link in the description above and join us every week. Now, if you'd like to comment or share, you can always put your questions or comments inside of the chat, and I'll do my best to bring them aloud. And I do want to mention that we keep anonymity high as a priority here. So I won't mention any names, or I'll try to do my best to paraphrase certain questions. So in that way, you guys can ask whatever you want. If you are here in the Zoom room, we'd love to hear from you. This is an interactive discussion, not a Ryan and Petra hour. And we'd love to see you by raising your hand, and then that way I can call you into the room. So I'm just going to open it up. Would anybody like to raise their hand and share with us today?
These lovely heady concepts of absolute and relative.
Yeah, I think you're melting a lot of people's minds out there. Um, One of the questions that was coming in, and just so that way informationally you guys know, is some of the folks were asking you to cite some of the sources that you were reading from. One of them was Thomas Troward that she did mention.
Right,
Um,
right.
yeah,
And
and
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's the Edinburgh Lectures. And he has a fabulous chapter in the Edinburgh Lectures called Causes and Conditions. You want to blow yourself completely out of the water and change your spiritual mind treatments from the ground up. Read that chapter. Now, the chapter will make a whole lot more sense if you read, of course, all the preceding chapters, because Thomas Troward he's a judge. He's very legalistically minded. And so he creates this very carefully laid out argument, simply each layer on top of the other, so that when you get to this chapter on causes and conditions, it blows your mind, but in this amazing way, because he's laid it down so beautifully that when you get there, it makes sense. So that's the big reference.
Yeah, and I got to mention too, Peter, I took Exploring Roots with you, if you remember or not,
Yes.
and I got a chance to get introduced to Thomas Troward. Um, I recall you telling me there's kind of two polarizations. Well, there's a lot, but
Right.
some of the two is you'll either like Emma Curtis Hopkins or you'll love Thomas Troward. And I really went towards Thomas Troward. And I think for a lot of the people who are looking for a logical explanation to this thing called the
Yes.
universe, I would definitely recommend investigating into and taking courses with you on it, because you give it a whole new spin. And he talks like a judge. So it's good to have somebody help to articulate the
Yeah.
meaning behind it.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to turn it on to Tim. Tim, do you want to go ahead and unmute yourself?
Hi, Tim.
There we go. Good morning.
Good morning.
First of all, I was happy, Petra, right?
Petra.
To see you
Petra.
in Petra. I did it right the first time. Good.
Uh-huh.
In the March issue of Science of Mind magazine, I picked up yesterday.
Yay,
so that was great
thank
to see you
you.
there.
Yay.
And then I'm taking a course in metaphysics right now. And we have been talking about multiple layers of consciousness.
Uh-huh.
So I heard you mention the absolute consciousness. They're in unity. There's some different language about that.
Right.
But do you feel that the consciousness continues to evolve, or there's multiple layers of consciousness at all times, or do we move, or can we move and stay into that absolute consciousness?
That is a fabulous question, Tim. Oh my God, that's a fabulous question. Thank you so much. Okay, so of course, what we have are maps. We have mental maps around all of these things and ways in which we describe them. And so off the top of my head, I can think of 3 separate mental maps that would answer the question, are there levels of consciousness? And each one of them accesses something a little bit differently. So the first mental map I would suggest to think about this is, it comes out of Hinduism, the ancient traditions, specifically Hinduism. And the idea is that consciousness is. That would be, consciousness could conceivably be another name for God, could be another name for the one nature of reality, could be another name for the quantum field, right? Consciousness is. And the physical universe is evolving so that consciousness can realize itself. So in Hinduism, we have these levels of consciousness identified. And very poetically, it's described as consciousness sleeps in the rocks, waves in the grass, moves in the animal, and becomes self-aware in the human being. Now we can quibble about is the gorilla self-aware, the dolphin, but the point is, right, there's a continuum of consciousness awakening to itself. And when it awakens to itself, then there is the freedom to co-create. And so there is an understanding that the entire trajectory of evolution itself has been not only to express life in all of its myriad of forms, but to over time evolve an organ, a physical organ that can actually house consciousness to the point where it can become self-aware of itself, and that it's co-create, and that it's creating, and that it has laws, not only physical laws, but laws of creation, and can engage with it. So at some level, these would be considered levels of consciousness. Troward lays them out beautifully, talks about them because he's very steeped in Hinduism. And then, of course, one has to ask the question, which Ernest Holmes does, well, and what about beyond the human being, self-aware, right? And so Ernest Holmes goes on to say, well, there are bodies terrestrial and there are bodies celestial. So surely there are some levels of consciousness beyond this where we're no longer embodied into physical form, which is, of course, where we get in the science of mind, this idea of an ever evolving spiral, as opposed to simply reincarnating over and over and over again in the same physicality. So that's one way we can think of levels of consciousness, right? And we as individuals are also waking up, which is what enlightenment means, is to wake up to the truth of our being, that we're not merely animals, right? I don't mean that pejoratively in any way, shape, or form, but that we are merely the fact that we're embodied in physicality, right? But that we're actually spiritual beings, and that we're moving more and more and more into that understanding. Okay, so that's one way we can think of levels of consciousness. So the next way we can think of levels of consciousness, we get through the work of somebody whose name I can't recall at the moment. Somebody's going to know. It comes out of Power versus Force, the Eye of the Storm, and I can't think of his name. It doesn't matter. And levels of consciousness having to do with the vibrational rates. And they did all kinds of interesting kinesiology and tests on people, and you can get beautiful graphs about this on the internet, where levels of consciousness have to do with vibrational rates. And like the lowest level of consciousness is despair, and the turning point is anger. There's these low in there, it's 10 and of 20 and 50 and 100, and then there's that place where anger helps shift something, and you say no. Then there's that neutral place, and then it starts being like incrementally we have peace and joy and love and bliss, and each one of them is a, shall we say, an evolution in consciousness, because basically what we're seeking to do is raise our vibrational rate so that we're at that highest level of consciousness, vibrating at the same frequency as the celestial spheres, right? The song of the celestial sphere is that highest vibration, because that's, of course, what sound is. It's vibrating at that highest frequency. So that's another way we can think about levels of consciousness. What level of consciousness are we operating at from our energetic, emotional state? And are we raising our levels of consciousness? So that's a second map, which I find very useful in terms of myself as an individual human being. Now, you ask the question, can we live at that highest level of consciousness? and I think the answer to that is yes, mostly, especially in our spiritual work. So I think we have examples of that, Jesus and Buddha and people who have really come to not only understand, but embody that this is the truth. This is what we read earlier, this Christ mind, right? This Christ mind knows who and what it is. So the last mental map that I would talk about briefly, comes out of the work of Marcia Sutton and some of the work of Michael Beckwith, and we've spent a lot of time working with it ourselves, and it's called the 4 stages of consciousness, right? And the 4 stages of consciousness, the first one is this consciousness of bitter experience that Ernest Holmes talked about. It's the consciousness of I'm a victim, Or quite frankly, I'm just on autopilot. I'm just unconscious. I'm unconscious about how, the programming in my life is actually out picturing and it's attracting. And that's the filtration system. I'm simply unaware of all of that. And so the first level of consciousness, this first stage of consciousness is basically called the Tumi consciousness. Life happens to me. I mean, I have some small efficacy in my life, but basically life happens to me. And that's what we're talking about, this conditionality. Everything is related to everything else and it's all out there. And I just, there's so much I can't do anything about. So the second stage of consciousness, of awakening, is wait a minute. No, I actually have some responsibility here. And I begin to learn that my attitudes and my thoughts and beliefs are in fact creating my reality. And I move into that second stage by taking responsibility for my words, my thoughts, and my actions. And I begin to develop an attitude of gratitude, and I begin to develop a positive attitude, and I begin to develop the I can attitude. And by God, I'm going to will. I absolutely. And it's very exciting. We actually discover, yes, in fact, we can if we believe we can, and we can't if we believe we can't. And so this is the second stage of consciousness, and it's critical. The critical piece is the taking of responsibility. I can't do anything about anything if I'm not willing to take responsibility for the fact that my beliefs, my programming is in fact what is out picturing. Well, at some point, we actually grow beyond that. We discover that, maybe there's something a little more going on. We can really exhaust ourselves by trying to make things happen with our positive attitude. We can kind of really just gets kind of a little exhausting. And that invites us then into the third state of consciousness. So the second state of consciousness is by me. So the first one is to me, right? I'm unconscious. I don't even know that I am doing anything other than just, reacting. By me is the second state of consciousness. No, wait a minute. My attitude and my intentionality does in fact matter, and it does in fact create things. To the third state of consciousness is, wait a minute. Like, I'm not the manager of the universe. I'm only the manager of my own life. So how does this really work? How does it work in terms of other people? How does it work in terms of humanity as a whole and the planet? I'm not responsible for all of that. That's nonsense. And we begin to discover that, wait a minute, there's actually something larger going on. There's actually this transcendent reality, this infinite reality. We could call it the one, we can call it God, we can call it the quantum field or the matrix or the force, whatever you want to call it. There's something bigger going on. And we surrender our need to figure out how to make something happen, recognizing that there is actually a law of cause and effect that is actually doing the work. And we surrender to that. That's the portal into this third stage of consciousness, where we begin to use things like, well, I'm allowing spirit to move through me. We become a channel for inspiration. We trust that the universe is moving and we're allowing ourselves to be moved. You see, I'm not just creating my life with my attitude, but I'm also now listening. So the second stage of consciousness, we learn to be directive. The third state of consciousness, we learn to be receptive to that inspiration and intuition, which is the intelligence of the universe seeking to move through us, which is the third stage, through us. Oh, life is seeking to express through me. That intelligence is seeking to express through me. So I have to get all my little crap out of the way, all my false beliefs out of the way, and allow that intelligence to move through me. And then, of course, I know what to do and I know how to be and how to move because spirit is moving through me. And so I'm surrendering my need to figure it out, my need to be in control, my need to know how it's going to happen. And I move into that place of deep and profound trust of the universe, and that the law's trajectory is actually good. It's actually for life. So that's the third stage of our evolution in consciousness. And the fourth stage then is the Christ consciousness. The portal is the portal of transformation. And what we transform is our locus of identity. Am I identifying myself with my human experience and all the bitter experience that created all those past patterns, which I have A, learned how to rewrite, and B, learned how to set aside, right? And I transform my identity from a human being to a spiritual being, to the individualized expression of the one as me, speaking and living in the world to express this unique way of being that has never been repeated. It will never be repeated, as never been before, right? And so the fourth stage is the as me consciousness. This is the stage where the absolute is in fact moving, and we come from the place of the absolute. And so when we speak our word, we're actually speaking the creative word. We're speaking the let there be light word. We're speaking the word of the Christ consciousness says you are now healed by your faith, be made whole, right? Where there's no separation between my will and the will of spirit, because I am spirit as me in the world. So we would say from this map, that is the highest stage of consciousness. That's the stage of being, of coming from the absolute. The first three stages all come from our separate human self. Now we've made the transformation where we recognize who we really are. And your question was, can we live there all the time? That is a great question, Tim. Certainly, I don't live there all the time. One would look at somebody like Jesus or Buddha and say, well, they lived there all the time, but Jesus certainly cursed the fig tree because it wouldn't give him fruit, even though it was out of season. He got a little bent out of shape about that. If there's any truth to any of these stories. So I think that's what enlightenment means, is to continue to strive to live in that consciousness, which of course in the previous map would mean we would be living at that highest vibration of the absolute as much as we possibly can. And most of us, when we think about the map of the four states or stages of consciousness, we're kind of like an amoeba. We kind of have a locus of where we tend to live from the most. But every time we do our spiritual work and we do deep spiritual mind treatment or deep meditation or deep powerful speaking from the truth of who we are, every single time I believe we are in that highest stage of consciousness. And the more that we can do that, the more we can live from that place. Now, I will be the first to say, man, I can go from fourth stage to first stage in a heartbeat, can't we? You just have to look at me wrong, or something has to not go right. And if I'm not paying attention, all of a sudden I'm like, wait, how did this happen? I have no idea how this happened. I didn't have anything to do with it. Why is this happening to me? Oh, wait, now I'm all the way back, boom, just like that, into the first state of consciousness. So, right, states and stages we get from Ken Wilber's work, his fabulous work on integral spirituality, that on the one hand, we have developmental stages, but we also have states in any given moment. And I think ultimately, the more self-aware we are, in that the Hindu idea of self-awakening in humanity, the more self-aware we are, the more quickly we can re-bring ourselves back from that time that we've dropped right into the first stage of consciousness. We can take responsibility. We can look at our patterns, look at our part. We can surrender into that, remembering that there is a law that is working for our good, and we can, boom, right now be back in that fourth stage of consciousness and say, I'm speaking from, I'm living from, I'm acting from this deep spiritual truth, which is that high vibration. So there's lots of maps about the stages about the levels of consciousness. I think we can work with all of them. And we remember that the map isn't the territory. right? It's not the territory. The map isn't reality. They're just maps. And they're just ways of getting a hold of these things that are actually, well, if they're really the absolute, they're not things that we can get a hold of, you know, in the laboratory, so to speak. And we can't measure them, well, we can actually, that's, anyway, it doesn't matter. So there you go. So maps of consciousness. Yes, I do believe each of us can touch those states of consciousness, that highest level of consciousness. I think we can live at that level of consciousness more and more and more and more. And I think, quite frankly, if it were, you know, if this is the gospel according to Petra, I think at some point when we truly achieve that we are predominantly living in that fourth stage of consciousness, when we are operating at those highest vibrations, I wonder if that isn't the time when we enter into the next level of the spiral, when we no longer have to be embodied in this physicality, where we're learning about the difference between causes and conditions, where we then actually do move to the next level of whatever that spiral is of ongoing expression, ongoing infinite experience of life, which the science of mind really believes in. So there you go. Thank you. That was a fabulous question. I really appreciate it. I hope that has given you something to chew on and think about. All right, Ryan, I think we're coming to the end of our time, but I am going to turn to you one more time.
Yeah, and the author, I just want to mention this for the folks who are out there listening. It was David R. Hawkins,
Yes,
who wrote
David.
Power versus Force. So if you guys want to go check that out.
Mm-hmm.
But no, we're good, Petra. So I'll go ahead and allow you to close it up.
Wonderful. So just, you know, these are like, we think of these as heady concepts, but the truth is they're juicy, meaty, weighty things to spend some time with. So just be with in your time, in your morning meditation, in your spiritual work. Is there any condition that I have placed upon my spiritual work and the desire for an outcome? Am I conditioning it on anything in society, in my family, in my own belief structure? And how do I take that out? How can I take that out so that my spiritual mind treatment raises itself and my consciousness to that level of the absolute? So play with that this week, and go ahead and keep reading and just being with it and letting it lead and guide you into a deeper awareness. We do have Sunday celebration coming up. We have some fabulous Easter plans. We have some fabulous classes coming up. So as Ryan said earlier, please do go to CSLDallas.org, find out what we're doing. We will let you know as soon as the building is open again and we can actually think about having people in the building. We were literally a heartbeat away from pushing the go button. And of course, we got flooded in the winter storm. So we're digging ourselves out of that, and we will absolutely be together on Easter. So all of that is at CSLDallas.org, and you can get it also from our email news. So please do sign up for that as well. Love you lots. Love being here with you on a Sunday morning, and we'll see you next week. Bye for now.